Imagine a world where the sun does not just set. Imagine a world where the sun dies. Every evening, the only thing that keeps you safe, the light disappears. When the golden glow fades behind the trees, the world changes. It stops being your home. It becomes a trap. You cannot see your hands in front of your face, but you can hear. You hear the snapping of a twig. You hear the soft patting of paws on the dirt. You hear the wind, and you wonder if it is the wind or if it is something breathing. You are cold. A cold that bites into your bones. A cold that makes your muscles ache and your teeth chatter. You huddle against the others. You feel their shivering bodies. You hold each other not because of love, but because of a desperate need to keep the heat from escaping. This was the life of your ancestors. For thousands upon thousands of years, this was the only reality humans knew. We were small. We were slow. We had no sharp claws. We had no thick fur to keep us warm. We were, quite simply, prey. We lived in the shadows of giants, and when the light went out, we were helpless. But everything was about to change. By the time we finish this story, you will understand something profound. You will see how a single discovery didn't just keep us warm. It didn't just cook our food. It remade us. It changed the shape of our faces. It changed the size of our brains. It changed the way we looked at the stars. This is the story of the moment we stopped being just another animal running in the dark. This is the story of the day we claimed the light for ourselves. Before we can understand the fire, we must understand the fear. To a human living hundreds of thousands of years ago, the world was a giant, confusing place. Nature was not a park. It was a master. When it rained, you got wet. When the wind blew, you froze. When the winter came, you watched the weak and the old grow quiet and never wake up. There was no such thing as a room. There was no such thing as indoors. There was only the open air and the constant, pressing weight of survival. Every day was a race to find enough fruit, enough roots, or perhaps a bit of meat left behind by a much larger hunter. You spent every waking second thinking about your stomach and your safety. But the worst part was the sun. The sun was the only clock. When the sun was high, you could see the leopard coming. You could see the edge of the cliff. You could see the path back to the cave or the thicket where your family waited. But the sun always leaves, and when the sun left, the world belonged to the things with better eyes than ours. Imagine the silence of a group of humans huddled in a small cave. They do not speak. They do not have words for tomorrow or yesterday yet. They only have the feeling of the now. And the now is terrifying. They listen to the darkness. They wait for the morning, hoping that everyone in the circle is still there when the light returns. In this world, heat was a dream. Safety was a luxury. And then, one day, the sky broke. The first fire a human ever saw was not a choice. It was an act of the world. Perhaps it was a summer afternoon. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of air that makes it hard to breathe. The clouds turned the color of a bruise. Then, a flash, a sound louder than a mountain falling. Lightning struck a dead tree. To the humans watching from the bushes, this was a monster. It was a bright, angry bird that lived in the wood. It hissed. It crackled. It ate the leaves and the branches, turning them into gray smoke that rose into the sky. Everything else ran away. The deer bolted. The lions retreated. The birds took flight. But the humans stayed. They stayed at the edge of the clearing, their eyes wide. They felt something they had never felt before from a distance. They felt the reach of the heat. Even from many steps away, this bright thing pushed back the cold. It was like a small piece of the sun had fallen from the sky and was living on the ground. At first, it was just a curiosity, a dangerous one. If you touched it, it bit you. If the wind blew it toward you, you had to run. But as the storm passed and the rain stopped, the bright thing stayed. It sat in the stump of the tree, glowing, breathing, eating slowly. Someone we will never know who was brave enough to get close. They didn't run. They reached out their hands, not to touch the flame, but to catch the warmth that threw off. It felt like the sun, but the sun was gone. This was the first miracle. For a long time, humans were just fire followers. They didn't know how to make it. If a fire started from a volcano or a lightning strike, they would follow it. They would watch it. When the fire began to die, they would try to feed it. Imagine the responsibility. Imagine being the one person in your tribe whose only job was to make sure the bright thing didn't go to sleep. If the fire died, the warmth died, the protection died. They began to carry it with them. A glowing branch, a bundle of slow-burning moss. They moved across the land, carrying the fire like a precious, fragile baby. They didn't understand what it was. To them, it was a living thing that needed to be fed. It ate wood. It breathed air. and in exchange, it gave them two gifts. The first gift was warmth. For the first time in history, a human could be warm when the world was cold. They could stand in the snow and not shiver. They could live in places where the air turned to ice. Fire was a coat that you didn't have to wear. It was a blanket made of light. The second gift was protection. The humans noticed something very important. The predators, the ones with the teeth like knives, were afraid of the fire. The fire was the only thing in the world that a lion would run away from. By bringing the fire to the mouth of a cave or putting it in the center of a camp, the humans created a wall. It wasn't a wall made of stone or wood. It was a wall made of light and heat. Inside the circle of the fire, you were safe. Outside the circle, the eyes of the predators watched, but they did not come closer. For the first time, humans could sleep, really sleep, deep, heavy sleep where you aren't listening for every single movement. Sleep where your body can finally rest and repair itself, because the fire was standing guard. Life began to center around the glow. Before fire, humans lived like any other animal. You wake up, you find food, you hide, you sleep. But fire changed the clock, because the fire provided light. The day didn't have to end when the sun went down. The day could continue for a few more hours. Think about what happens when people sit around a fire. They look at each other. They see each other as faces in a way they never could in the harsh light of the noon sun or the total darkness of the night. In the soft, flickering orange light, people began to stay awake. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were being. They began to share the experiences of the day. They began to use their hands to make things while they sat in the warmth. They began to notice the patterns in the flames. The emotions of the human experience were being forged in that heat. The feeling of home was born here. Home wasn't a place. It was wherever the fire was burning. If you had the fire, you had a center. You had a place where the tribe belonged. The children would play near the heat. The old would rest their aching joints near the coals. The hunters would return to the light. But at this stage, it was still just a tool for comfort. It was a heater. It was a flashlight. It was a fence to keep the monsters away. Humans looked at the fire and thought, "This keeps me warm. This keeps me safe." They had no idea that the fire was doing something else. They didn't realize that by sitting near it, by tending to it, and by living their lives around it, they were inviting a change that would go much deeper than their skin. As the generations passed, the relationship grew. Humans became better at keeping the fire alive. They learned which woods burned long and which woods popped and sparked. They learned how to shield it from the rain. They were now the masters of the bright thing, but they were still eating the same raw roots. They were still chewing on the same tough, stringy raw meat that took hours to swallow. They were still limited by what their bodies could digest from the cold, hard earth. They were using fire to change the world around them, making it brighter and warmer. They had not yet realized that fire could change the things inside the world. One night, something happened. Perhaps it was an accident. Perhaps a piece of meat fell into the glowing embers. Perhaps someone dropped a hard root into the hot ash. Maybe they tried to pull it out, thinking it was ruined. Maybe they smelled something, a smell that had never existed in the history of the world. Until that moment, a smell that made their mouths water, a smell that promised something more than just survival. The fire had given them safety. It had given them sleep. It had given them a wall against the night. But the fire was hungry for more, and very soon, the fire was going to do something that no amount of evolution could do on its own. It was going to unlock a power hidden inside our food, and in doing so, it was going to change our very bodies from the inside out. The warmth was just the beginning. Humans were about to learn that fire wasn't just something to sit by. Fire was something that was about to make us human. That smell in the air was the first time the world had ever scented a meal. Before this moment, food was simply something you found and swallowed. It was a chore. It was hard work. To understand how fire changed us, you have to understand how difficult it was to be a human before the cooking began. Imagine spending your entire day chewing. If you found a piece of raw meat, it was tough, stringy, and dangerous. If you found a root in the ground, it was hard and bitter. Our ancestors spent nearly half of their waking hours just moving their jaws. They chewed until their muscles ached. They chewed because their stomachs could not handle the food any other way. Because raw food is hard to digest, your body has to work overtime. It takes a massive amount of energy just to break down a raw meal. This left our ancestors tired. It left them with small brains and big stomachs. In the world of nature, you have a choice. You can have a big gut to digest raw plants, or you can have a big brain to think. You cannot easily have both. Then came the fire. When that first piece of meat or that first starchy root fell into the embers. The fire did something miraculous. It began to chew the food for us. The heat broke down the tough fibers. It turned hard, woody plants into soft, sweet bites. It turned cold, bloody meat into something that melted in the mouth. When those early humans took their first bite of cooked food, they didn't just taste something better. They felt something better. For the first time, a meal didn't feel like a struggle. It felt like a gift. This was the great trade. Because the food was now soft and easy to digest, our bodies began to change. Over many, many generations, our giant, heavy jaws began to shrink. We didn't need them anymore. Our teeth became smaller. Our stomachs, which no longer had to work so hard to process raw, tough fiber, also began to shrink. But that energy had to go somewhere. As our guts got smaller, our brains began to grow. We were fueling ourselves with high energy, cooked meals that took almost no effort to eat. Suddenly, we had a surplus of power. Our bodies were no longer spending all their fuel on digestion. They were sending that fuel to the gray matter behind our eyes. We were literally eating our way toward intelligence. But the change wasn't just happening inside our bodies. It was happening in the way we lived our lives. Before fire, life was lived in a rush. You had to find food, eat it immediately, and hide before dark. There was no dinner time. There was only survival time. But a fire requires someone to sit still. You have to wait for the wood to burn down. You have to wait for the food to cook. This waiting created something humans had never really had before. Free time. Imagine the scene. The sun has gone down. The predators are kept back by the wall of light. The bellies of the tribe are full of warm, cooked food that didn't take 6 hours to chew. For the first time in history, humans were not just resting. They were bored. And in that boredom, we found each other. In the daylight, you are looking at the ground for tracks. You are looking at the trees for fruit. You are looking at the horizon for danger. You rarely look at the person next to you. But around a fire, there's nowhere else to look. The light of the fire is soft. It makes faces look warm. It draws people into a circle. In a circle, everyone is equal. Everyone can see everyone else. This was the birth of the human social world. They began to make sounds, not just warnings or grunts of pain, but sounds to describe what happened during the day. They began to point at the flames and tell a story without words. They began to remember. By sitting around the fire, we were extending the day. We were stealing hours back from the night. In those extra hours, we weren't just hunters anymore. We were becoming thinkers. We were becoming friends. We were becoming we began to notice things. We noticed that certain stones changed. When they got hot, we noticed that the smoke went up to the stars. We began to wonder why. Fire was no longer just a weapon against the cold. It had become a teacher. It taught us that if we waited, things could get better. It taught us that we could change the world around us. It taught us that we were the only creatures in the forest who didn't have to follow the rules of the sun. As our brains grew larger and our groups grew tighter, the way we looked at the world shifted. We weren't just reacting to nature anymore. We were starting to plan. We were starting to dream. The fire had reshaped our faces. It had reshaped our guts. And now, it was starting to reshape our destiny. We had mastered the heat. We had mastered the cook. We had mastered the social circle. We were no longer just another animal trying to survive until morning. We were becoming something entirely new, something the earth had never seen before. But as our intelligence grew, so did our ambition. The fire had given us so much, but we were starting to realize that the flame could do more than just soften meat or light up a face. We were starting to look at the fire and see a power that could do more than help us survive. We were about to move from using fire to stay alive, to using fire to remake the very materials of the earth. We were standing on the edge of a discovery that would take us out of the caves and into a world of our own making. The human mind was now a roaring flame of its own, and it was about to turn its gaze toward the future. The day was coming when fire wouldn't just change the human body, it would change the human spirit. And once that happened, there would be no going back. The extra energy from the cooked food did not just sit in our bodies. It had to go somewhere. It went to the brain. And as the brain grew, something happened inside the human head that had never happened in any other creature on the planet. We began to see things that were not there. For millions of years, every animal on Earth lived only in the now. A lion thinks about the zebra in front of it. A bird thinks about the branch it is sitting on. But around the fire, humans began to think about then and tomorrow. They began to imagine the first time a human looked into the center of a fire. The flames never move the same way twice. They dance. They create shapes. They cast long, flickering shadows on the walls of the cave. In those shadows, Our ancestors didn't just see darkness, they saw the spirits of the animals they hunted. They saw the faces of the people they had lost. They saw the stories of their lives playing out in the light. This was the birth of the human mind. The fire didn't just give us light to see the world, it gave us the light to see ourselves. Because we were sitting together for hours after the sun went down, we had to do something with our voices. We began to turn simple grunts and warnings into complex patterns. We began to name the things around us. This branch, that mountain, that star. But more importantly, we began to tell stories. A story is a way of keeping a person alive after they are gone. Around the fire, the oldest members of the group would talk about the great drought of many years ago, or the time the giant cats came from the north. The young would listen. They would learn how to survive without having to experience the danger themselves. This was the beginning of human culture. We were no longer starting from zero with every new generation. We were building a ladder of knowledge, and the fire was the place where that ladder was built. This shared storytelling created a bond that was stronger than blood. It created a we. When you sit around a fire and share a meal and a story, you are no longer just a group of individuals. You are a tribe. You have a shared past and a shared future. You have rituals. You might dance around the heat, or sing to the flames, or offer a piece of meat to the fire as a way of saying thank you. In these moments, leadership was born. The leader wasn't always the strongest hunter anymore. Sometimes, the leader was the one who knew the best stories, the one who could explain the world, the one who could keep the group together when the night was long. Fire turned us into a political species. It created the first halls of power, right there in the dirt, around a glowing circle of embers. But the fire did something even more profound. It separated us from the rest of nature forever. Every other animal on Earth, from the smallest mouse to the largest elephant, is defined by its environment. If it is cold, they grow fur or they die. If the food is hard, they grow flat teeth or they die. But humans found a way to change the environment instead of changing themselves. We brought the heat with us. We brought the light with us. We were the only creatures who could live in the freezing mountains and the burning deserts at the same time because we carried a piece of the sun in our hands. This created a gap between us and the animals. On one side of the fire was the human thinking, talking, planning, and dreaming. On the other side of the fire, in the darkness, were the eyes of the predators. They were still trapped in the now. They were still slaves to the cold and the dark. They looked at the fire with fear, and they saw a creature that was becoming something more than an animal. They saw a master. This was the moment we realized we were different. We were no longer just part of the food chain. We were starting to stand outside of it. As our intelligence grew, we began to use fire for more than just survival. We noticed that if we burned a patch of forest, the grass grew back greener and attracted more deer. We were beginning to landscape the planet. We noticed that fire could harden the tip of a wooden spear, making it a better tool for the hunt. We were beginning to manufacture everything we call civilization, our cities, our machines. Our technology started with that first realization that fire could change things. If you can change a piece of meat with fire, you can change a piece of clay into a bowl. If you can change clay, you can change ore into metal. If you can change metal, you can build an engine. Every engine in every car today is just a controlled fire. Every light bulb in every home is just a way of pushing back the night, just like our ancestors did. Even the screen you are looking at right now is a source of light that draws your attention, much like the flickering flames drew the attention of the first humans in the caves. We have never truly left the campfire. We have just made it bigger and more complex. Fire was the great teacher. It taught us patience because we had to wait for the wood to burn. It taught us cooperation because we had to work together to keep the flame alive. It taught us curiosity because we wanted to see what else the heat could do. But most of all, fire gave us our humanity. Without that warmth, we would still be huddled in the dark, shivering and afraid, waiting for a sun that might not come. Without that cooked food, our brains would never have had the energy to wonder about the stars. Without that circle of light, we would never have learned to speak, to love, or to hope. The day we realized fire was more than warmth was the day we truly became human. It was the moment we stopped running from the world and started to build a new one. We are the people of the flame. We are the ones who claim the light for ourselves. And as long as we keep that fire burning, the fire in our engines, the fire in our homes, and the fire of curiosity in our minds, we will continue to move forward out of the darkness and into the unknown. For millions of years, the night was our enemy. Today, the night is just another time for us to work, to play, and to dream. We have won the war against the darkness, and it all began with a single spark, a bit of dry wood, and a group of humans who decided that the light belonged to them. Fire was not just a tool. It was the moment our story truly began, and that story is still being written today. In every flickering light and every burning star we reach for, we are no longer afraid of the dark, because we have learned how to carry the light within us. We have come a long way from that first shivering group of humans, huddled around a lightning-struck tree. We have traced the journey of how fire softened our food, grew our brains, and gave us the language to tell our stories. But the story of fire did not end when we stepped out of the caves. In fact, that was only the moment the flame began to grow. To understand the final stage of our relationship with fire, we have to look at what fire represents. It is not just heat. It is power. It is the ability to take the raw materials of the earth and force them to become something else. Once we realized that fire could change things, we became a species that was never satisfied with the world as we found it. We began to look at the cold, hard rocks of the earth and realized that if we fed them to a hot enough fire, they would bleed. They would release metals copper, bronze, and eventually iron. We took the fire and we pushed it into small, enclosed spaces. We learned how to make the fire hotter than the sun. We used it to forge tools that were stronger than any bone and sharper than any tooth. The fire was no longer just sitting in the center of our camp. It was now working for us. It was in our kilns, making bricks for our first cities. It was in our forges, making the plows that would turn the earth and feed millions. We had moved from being fire followers to fire masters. But as the flame grew, so did the responsibility. Fire is the only tool that has a life of its own. If you drop a stone tool, it stays where it falls. But if you drop a fire, it runs, it eats, it grows. As we built our world out of fire, we had to learn the hardest lesson of all, how to control the power we had summoned. We learned that fire could build a city, but it could also turn one to ash in a single night. We realized that the same flame that kept us safe from the lions was now the most dangerous thing in our lives. This changed our minds once again. It taught us about rules. It taught us about boundaries. It taught us that power requires discipline. As the centuries turned into thousands of years, the fire became invisible. We learned how to hide the flame inside massive machines. We learned how to use the heat of ancient, buried forests to power giant engines that could cross oceans and move mountains. When you look at a massive ship or a train moving across the land, you are looking at the descendant of that first campfire. It is the same energy, just harnessed and focused with incredible precision. And then, we did the impossible. We took the fire and we pointed it at the sky. A rocket sitting on a launch pad is perhaps the ultimate expression of our journey with fire. It is a massive, controlled explosion. It is a tower of fire that carries the human spirit away from the earth itself. When we go to the moon, we are taking our campfire with us. We are still that same species, carrying the light into the darkness, refusing to be limited by the shadows. But there is one final realization we must face. The fire didn't just change our tools or our bodies. It changed our place in the universe. Because we have fire, we are no longer just inhabitants of the earth. We are the stewards of it. We are the only creatures who can change the temperature of the planet. We are the only ones who can create light where there should be darkness. We often think of fire as something outside of us, something we start with a match or a spark. But the truth is more profound. The fire is inside us. Every thought you have, every beat of your heart, is a form of slow, controlled burning. Your body is turning food into energy using the same chemical process that happens in a flame. We are not just the people who use fire. We are the fire. The warmth we feel in our skin is the same warmth our ancestors felt 500,000 years ago. The curiosity we feel when we look at the stars is the same curiosity that was born around the first flickering embers in a cave. When we look back at the day humans realized fire was more than warmth, we are looking at the birth of the human soul. It was the moment we decided that we would not be cold. We would not be afraid. We would not be quiet. We chose the light. And as long as we continue to tend to that flame, the fire in our technology, and the fire in our hearts, there is no darkness we cannot overcome. The story of fire is the story of us. It is a story that began with a spark in the dark, and it is a story that will continue as long as there is a human left to dream, to plan, and to keep the fire burning. The campfire is still there. It is in our homes, our cars, and our hearts. It is the wall against the night that will never go out.